The galaxy had grown quiet, too quiet. Dr. Lyra Voss pressed her forehead against the cold viewport of Research Station Kepler 7, watching the endless expanse of space that had once seemed so full of promise. 3 months had passed since humanity's dramatic return to galactic politics, 3 months since the Dominion Empire's iron grip had begun to show cracks. Yet something about this silence felt wrong, pregnant with menace. "Director, you need to see this." The tremor in her assistant's voice made her skin crawl. Dr. Marcus Webb had served on deep space stations for 15 years, nothing rattled him anymore. Until now. Voss turned from the viewport, noting how the young man's hands shook as he manipulated the holographic display. The sensor readings that materialized before them defied explanation, energy signatures that pulsed like a diseased heartbeat, moving through space in patterns that suggested intelligence but followed no known physics. "When did these readings start?" she asked, though she already dreaded the answer. 72 hours ago. "But Director." Webb's voice dropped to a whisper. "They're not just readings anymore. Long-range telescopes have visual confirmation. There's something out there. Something vast." The image that flickered to life on their main screen would haunt Voss for the rest of her life, however long that might be. Against the star field, a shadow moved. Not the clean lines of ships or the geometric patterns of known technology, but something organic, flowing like oil through the void. And it was moving toward inhabited space. "Get me a direct line to Dominion High Command," Voss ordered, her scientific training warring with primal terror. "Classification, Galactic Emergency." But as she spoke, the lights flickered. The station's biosensors detected something impossible, life signs approaching through hard vacuum. Through the viewport, she could see them now, creatures that belonged in nightmares, moving through space as if it were their natural habitat. The first alarm began to wail, but it was already too late. Administrator Chen had been proud of Colony Riven 7. Built on the bones of a dead world at the galaxy's edge, it represented humanity's refusal to simply survive. They would thrive. As he watched the binary sunrise paint the rocky landscape in shades of gold and crimson, he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. 12,000 souls called this place home. In 6 hours, they would all be dead. The attack began with silence. The colony's long-range sensors simply stopped working. Not damaged, not destroyed, they just ceased to function, as if something had reached into their electronic minds and switched them off. Chin to defense control, he spoke into his comm, keeping his voice level despite the growing unease. "Report status on perimeter sensors." Static answered him. Through his office window, Chin watched the morning shift change in the agricultural domes. Normal. Peaceful. The calm before the storm had never felt so ominous. Then the sky began to move. What he had mistaken for distant clouds resolved into something impossible, a living carpet of creatures descending from orbit. Not ships, not transports, but beings that moved through vacuum as easily as swimming through water. Each one was different. Some resembled metallic arachnids the size of ground cars, others looked like organic missiles with too many teeth, and still others defied description entirely. But they all moved with the same fluid coordination, like cells in a vast organism. "All hands, code black." Chen screamed into the emergency channel. "This is not a drill. We are under attack by unknown." The first wave hit the outer perimeter like a tsunami of flesh and metal. The defensive barriers that had taken 3 years to construct crumbled in minutes. But these creatures weren't using conventional weapons, they were simply consuming everything in their path, breaking down matter at the molecular level and incorporating it into their own forms. Security Chief Martinez burst through his door, her uniform torn and her eyes wild with terror. "Sir, we need to evacuate now. The perimeter guns aren't even slowing them down. It's like they're learning to adapt faster than we can fire." Chen grabbed his emergency kit, his hands moving on autopilot while his mind struggled to process what he was seeing. Through the chaos outside, he glimpsed something that would haunt what little remained of his life. The creatures weren't just destroying, they were studying. When they encountered a locked door, one would examine it briefly before the entire swarm suddenly knew how to breach that type of barrier. When they faced a particular weapon, they would adapt, and that adaptation would instantly spread to every other creature. The evacuation ships, Chen began. Gone, Martinez cut him off, her voice hollow with despair. They didn't destroy them. They absorbed them. Ships, crew, everything. I watched a transport full of children just dissolve into the mass. The wall exploded inward with surgical precision, and the swarm flowed through like a living tide. Chen's last coherent thought before the darkness took him was a prayer that someone, somewhere, would understand what humanity was truly facing. There was no order, no command, just an endless wave of them. Each was a mindless drone, yet together, they formed something far more terrifying than the sum of their parts. As the last transmission from Riven 7 fell silent, the galaxy would soon learn a horrible truth: they were not facing an enemy. They were facing evolution itself, and they had been found wanting. The war room aboard the Sovereign's Pride had witnessed countless strategic briefings, but never one like this. General Kor stood before the holographic display, his weathered hands gripping the table's edge as if it were the only thing anchoring him to sanity. Around him, the Dominion's most decorated officers sat in stunned silence, their faces reflecting the light of burning worlds. 17 colonies in 6 days, Admiral Thane reported, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Complete planetary sterilization. No survivors, no wreckage, no trace that 12 million people ever existed. The display showed the expanding wave of destruction across Dominion space. Each red marker represented not just a failed defense but an entire world consumed, its population added to whatever force they were fighting. They're not random attacks, Intelligence Officer Vex added, manipulating the hologram to show attack patterns. There's clear intelligence behind the selection of targets. They're not just destroying, they're harvesting. Each world they take makes them stronger. Dar. Naren, the Empire's chief xenobiologist, stepped forward with findings that had shaken the High Command to its core. The specimens we recovered from the outer rim before contact was lost, they share identical neural pathway structures. Not similar, identical, down to the quantum level. It's as if each creature is literally a part of the same mind. General Kor felt ice form in his chest. You're describing a hive mind. More than that, Dr. Naren replied, her scientific training barely masking her terror. I'm describing a collective intelligence that treats individual consciousness like we treat individual cells. When one learns, they all learn. When one adapts, they all adapt. They're not fighting us, they're digesting us. The implications settled over the room like a funeral shroud. Admiral Thane voiced what they were all thinking: how do you fight an enemy that becomes stronger with every engagement? Before anyone could answer, the lights flickered. Emergency klaxons began to wail as the ship's biosensors detected something impossible: massive life signs approaching through hard vacuum. All hands to battle stations. Kor commanded, but even as he spoke, he felt the futility of the order. Through the viewports, they could see them coming, a living cloud of creatures moving with perfect coordination, surrounding the Pride like antibodies attacking an infection. The Hive had found them. The battle was over before it truly began. The Sovereign's Pride, mightiest warship in the Dominion fleet, managed to destroy hundreds of creatures in the first salvo. But for every one that fell, 2 more took its place, and worse, they had learned. The second wave of creatures moved differently, adapting to the ship's weapons in real time. As the boarding pods breached the hull and the corridors filled with the sounds of desperate battle, General Kor made a decision that would haunt his final moments. Opening a secure channel, he sent a message to the one force in the galaxy that might have a chance against this threat. The message was simple: Hart. God help us all, we need you. Then the bridge doors exploded inward, and General Kor got his first close look at humanity's newest nightmare. The creature that flowed through the breach was beautiful and terrible, part organic, part mechanical, but wholly alien. It moved with fluid grace, studying him with intelligence that was vast and cold and utterly without mercy. "So this is what defiance looks like," it said, speaking with the voices of a dozen assimilated crew members. How quaint. The Hive was not a species, it was a force of nature made conscious. A collective intelligence that viewed individual life as nothing more than raw material for its expansion. And now, it had set its sights on the galaxy. The Dominion had ruled through fear and superior firepower for 3 centuries. In a single week, they learned what it meant to be prey. Commander Elias Hart stood in the Phoenix's observation lounge, staring out at the stars that had become humanity's sanctuary after decades of persecution. His reflection in the reinforced transparent steel looked older than his 42 years, lines carved by loss, eyes hardened by too many impossible decisions. Behind him, the soft chatter of his crew provided a comforting backdrop to his thoughts. These people had become more than subordinates, they were family forged in the crucible of rebellion. Sarah Chen, whose parents had died in a Dominion labor camp. Jake Morrison, whose sister had been relocated during the purges. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, who had sacrificed a promising career to treat wounded rebels in hidden medical bays. Each of them carried scars that would never heal, wounds inflicted by the very empire that now came seeking their help. "Commander, incoming transmission," Sarah called from the bridge, her voice carrying a note of confusion. It's from General Kor." Hart's jaw tightened. Kor's name was legend among the resistance, not for heroism, but for the methodical brutality he had brought to the campaign against human insurgents. This was the man who had ordered the massacre at New Geneva, who had turned entire sectors into graveyards in the name of Dominion security. On screen, Hart said, returning to the bridge with deliberate calm. The hologram that materialized showed a very different man than the proud general from intelligence files. Kor looked haggard, desperate, his eyes darting nervously as if something might be watching him from the shadows. When he spoke, his voice carried none of the authority Hart had expected. "Commander Hart," Kor began, his words tumbling out in a rush. "I know what you're thinking. I know what I've done to your people. But that doesn't matter anymore. Nothing matters anymore except what's coming." Hart studied the man's face, looking for signs of deception but finding only naked terror. "What do you want, General?" "Your help," Kor replied, the words seeming to physically pain him. "There's something out there, something that makes our war look like children playing with toys. We've lost 67 worlds in 2 weeks. Not conquered, consumed. Utterly and completely consumed." Dr. Rodriguez stepped closer to the display, her medical training picking up subtle signs others might miss. "You're showing symptoms of severe stress, General. Possible neural trauma. What exactly did you encounter?" Kor's laugh held no humor. "We call it the Hive. Imagine every nightmare you've ever had about losing your individuality, your free will, your very self, then make it real. They don't kill you. They make you part of something larger, and you're still conscious while it happens." The bridge fell silent. Hart had seen horrors during the rebellion, but something in Kor's voice suggested this was different, worse than any atrocity committed by thinking beings. "Why come to us?" Hart asked. "The mighty Dominion asking humanity for help." "Because you're the only ones who fight like you have nothing to lose," Kor replied. "Because you've survived against impossible odds. Because you know what it means to face extinction and keep fighting anyway." He paused, his eyes losing focus for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was subtly different, more controlled, but somehow wrong. "We should meet, Commander. Face to face. There's so much to discuss. So much to share." Hart felt Elena's hand touch his arm in warning. She had noticed it too, the subtle change in speech patterns, the way Kor's eyes seemed to focus on something beyond the camera. "We'll consider your proposal, General," Hart said carefully. "Phoenix out." As the transmission ended, the bridge remained silent. Finally, Jake voiced what they were all thinking, that wasn't entirely human talking, was it? Elena shook her head, her medical scanner still trained on where Core's image had been. Neural patterns were fluctuating in ways I've never seen. It's as if something else was influencing his thoughts, maybe even speaking through him. Hart felt the familiar weight of command settle on his shoulders. Then we know what we're dealing with. The question is, do we run, or do we fight? We fight, Sarah said without hesitation. We always fight. Hart nodded, pride and terror warring in his chest. Jake, plot a course for the outer rim. Elena, I want full bioscans on anyone who comes aboard this ship. And everyone, stay alert. I have a feeling we're about to learn that the Dominion's problems are our problems now. As the Phoenix turned toward the unknown, Hart couldn't shake the feeling that they were flying into something far worse than any war they had ever fought. This wasn't about politics or territory or freedom. This was about the right to remain human. The Dominion battlecruiser Unbreakable had earned its name through 3 centuries of successful campaigns, its hull scarred by weapons from a dozen different species but never truly defeated. Commander Petra Vale stood on its bridge with quiet confidence, watching her tactical displays as they approached the reported Hive incursion. That confidence lasted exactly 18 minutes. Contact bearing 047, multiple signatures, her sensor officer reported. I'm reading, this can't be right. There are thousands of individual contacts, but they're moving in perfect formation. On the main view screen, space itself seemed to writhe with unnatural life. What Vale had initially mistaken for debris or asteroids resolved into creatures, living beings that moved through vacuum as if it were their natural element. Each one was unique in form but identical in purpose, flowing through space like cells in a vast organism. All weapons, target the lead formation, Vale commanded, her training overriding her growing unease. Full spread, maximum yield. The Unbreakable's particle cannons erupted in brilliant displays of destruction, each blast capable of vaporizing a small moon. The weapons found their targets with devastating accuracy, and utterly failed to stop them. Commander, they're adapting, her weapons officer called out, panic creeping into his voice. The energy weapons are having diminishing effect with each shot. It's like they're learning our attack patterns in real time. Vale watched in fascination and growing horror as the creatures absorbed her ship's most powerful weapons, their forms shifting and changing to counter each new attack. When she switched to kinetic weapons, they adapted to those as well. When she tried random firing patterns, they predicted the randomness. Where are they learning this? She demanded. Her science officer's face was pale with terror. Commander, I think they're learning from us. Every tactical decision we make, every weapon we fire, they're studying us, cataloging our responses. And they're sharing that information instantly across the entire swarm. The first creatures reached the ship's hull with grace that was almost beautiful. Through internal sensors, Vale watched her security teams fight desperately in the corridors as things that should not exist breached their ship's most secure areas. But the most disturbing reports came from the sections that had been overrun. Commander, came a whisper over the comm from Chief Medical Officer Kane. They're not killing the crew. They're changing them. Converting them. The affected personnel are helping them navigate the ship's systems. Vale felt her blood turn to ice. The Hive wasn't just conquering, it was assimilating, turning their own people against them. Medical, can you reverse the process? She asked, though she already knew the answer. I don't think they want it reversed, Commander, Kane replied, his voice breaking. I can see Lieutenant Torres from here. She's smiling while she helps them access the ship's computer core. She looks happy. The bridge shuddered as creatures found their way to critical systems. Vale watched her proud ship die around her, its very technology turned against it by crew members who had been part of her family just minutes before. All hands, abandon ship, she ordered, her voice heavy with defeat. Emergency evacuation, authorization Vale 77 Alpha. But as she made her way to the escape pods, Vale discovered the true horror of what they faced. The creatures weren't just taking her ship, they were learning from it. Through the viewports, she watched in sick fascination as the swarm began to reconfigure itself, incorporating Dominion technology into their organic forms. Her escape pod launched just as the Unbreakable fired its main batteries, not at the swarm, but at the fleeing evacuation craft. The ship's weapons, now under Hive control and crewed by converted personnel, systematically destroyed every pod except her own. As she drifted in space, her pod's emergency beacon screaming into the void, Vale understood with crushing clarity that she had been spared deliberately. The Hive wanted a witness. They wanted someone to carry the message of their power back to the remaining fleet. The Unbreakable, pride of the Dominion Navy, hung in space like a grotesque hybrid of technology and organic matter. Where her crew had once served, creatures now flowed through her corridors. But they moved with purpose, with knowledge of human tactics and Dominion technology. The ship had become part of the Hive, and the Hive had become infinitely more dangerous. The meeting took place in neutral space, aboard a derelict space station that had once been a trade hub between human and alien colonies. Commander Hart arrived with a small escort, his sensors sweeping continuously for signs of ambush or deception. What he found was worse than either. General Corps waited in the station's central conference room, flanked by two officers Hart didn't recognize. But it was Corps himself who drew Hart's attention, and filled him with unease. The man looked physically healthy, even refreshed, but his eyes held something that hadn't been there in their previous communication. "Commander Hart," Corps said, rising to greet him. His voice was warm, welcoming, but there was something else beneath it, like hearing your own voice played back on a recording. "Thank you for coming. I know this must be difficult, given our history." Hart remained standing, his hand resting casually near his sidearm. Behind him, Elena ran discreet bioscans while Jake kept one eye on the exits. "You said you needed our help against something called the Hive. Start talking." Corps gestured to a holographic display that showed the spreading destruction across Dominion space. "They appeared 3 weeks ago at the Rim territories. At first, we thought they were just another species seeking Lebensraum, living space. We were wrong. The images that followed would haunt Hart's dreams. Entire worlds stripped bare, their population simply, gone. Not killed, not enslaved, but absorbed into something larger and more terrible than any conquest in galactic history. They're not just another species," Corps continued, his voice taking on an odd cadence. "They're a collective intelligence. Every creature is both individual and part of the whole. When one learns, they all learn. When one adapts, they all adapt." Elena stepped forward, her medical scanner detecting something that made her blood run cold. "General, I'm reading unusual neural patterns. Have you had any direct contact with these creatures?" Corps smiled, and for a moment his features seemed to shift slightly, or perhaps it was just the lighting. "Contact? Oh yes, Commander Rodriguez. Intimate contact. You could say they've given me a new perspective on the conflict." Hart's hand moved to his weapon as understanding dawned. "You're infected." "Infected is such a limited term," Corps replied, his voice now carrying harmonics that shouldn't exist in human speech. "I prefer to think of it as enlightened. The Hive doesn't destroy individuality, it perfects it. Every mind becomes part of something greater while retaining what made it unique." The two officers flanking Corps moved with inhuman synchronization, their movements too fluid, too coordinated. Hart realized with growing horror that they weren't Dominion personnel at all, they were something wearing human faces. "The beauty of it," Corps continued, seemingly unaware of Hart's growing alarm, "is that the conversion is voluntary. Once you understand what the Hive offers, you want to be part of it. The loneliness ends, Commander. The doubt, the fear, the weight of individual decision, all of it ends." Hart drew his weapon in one smooth motion, but Corps made no move to defend himself. Instead, he smiled with what might have been pity. "You can't fight evolution, Commander. Your species has always been destined for this moment. The Hive has been watching, waiting, studying you through your conflicts with the Dominion. You've provided such interesting data. Jake, Elena, we're leaving. Now. Hart backed toward the exit, keeping his weapon trained on Core. Of course, Core said amiably. The Hive is patient. When you're ready to join the larger conversation, we'll be waiting. As they fled the station, Hart couldn't shake the feeling that they had walked into something far more sophisticated than a simple trap. The Hive wasn't just expanding, it was recruiting. And it had been studying humanity long before the first colony fell. Commander, Elena said as they reached the Phoenix, those neural readings. Core isn't just infected. He's been selectively modified. The Hive kept his intelligence, his tactical knowledge, even his personality, but it's all serving a new master now. Hart nodded grimly as their ship pulled away from the station. Then we know what we're really fighting. Not just an invasion, a conversion. And they're using our own people to do it. The war had just become personal. The planet that had once been called Paradise now pulsed with alien life, its surface transformed into a living neural network that coordinated Hive activities across 3 sectors. Commander Hart stood on the bridge of the Phoenix, watching the abomination that hung in space before them like a cancer made manifest. Around him, the remnants of 2 fleets prepared for what might be their final battle. 31 ships, 17 human, 14 Dominion, against a world-sized organism that had already consumed billions of lives. The mathematics were not encouraging. Final systems check, Hart called out, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what they faced. His crew moved with practiced efficiency, but he could see the tension in their movements, the weight of impossible odds. Human fleet reports ready, Sarah announced from her communications station. Commodore Zhang says his people are prepared to follow us into hell itself. Dominion remnant confirms battle readiness, added Jake from his pilot station. Admiral Thane sends her regards and wishes us all a glorious death. Hart almost smiled at that. After everything they had been through, humans and Dominion forces working together against a common enemy that threatened all conscious life. There was irony there, but no time to appreciate it. Elena, final confirmation on the neural core location. Dr. Rodriguez studied her displays one last time, her scientific mind still struggling to process what they were seeing. The biosignatures are unmistakable. That structure at the northern pole, it's the brain. Destroy it, and we sever the Hive's ability to coordinate across interstellar distances. And if we're wrong? Then we all die for nothing instead of dying for something, she replied with a wan smile. I know which I prefer. Hart activated the fleet-wide communication channel. All vessels, this is Phoenix Actual. What we're about to face defies everything we understand about life, about consciousness, about the nature of existence itself. The enemy below us isn't just another species, it's a perversion of the very concept of individual will. He paused, looking out at the alien landscape that breathed with malevolent purpose. The Hive believes that consciousness is meant to serve a collective purpose, that individual thought is a flaw to be corrected. Today, we show them what free minds can accomplish when they choose to stand together. The assault began with a coordinated bombardment that turned space into a light show of destruction. Fusion missiles and particle beams rained down on the planet's surface, vaporizing the outer biostructures in brilliant displays of annihilation. For a moment, Hart dared to hope they might actually succeed. Then the planet screamed. The sound didn't come through space but through the psychic connection the Hive had been building with infected crew members throughout both fleets. On a dozen ships, officers who had seemed perfectly normal suddenly collapsed, clutching their heads in agony as alien thoughts flooded their minds. Neural feedback through compromised personnel. Elena shouted over the chaos. The planet is using infected crew as relay points. Hart watched in horror as the Dominion cruiser Valiant suddenly opened fire on its own escort ships. Through the view screen, he could see figures moving on the Valiant's bridge, figures that moved with the fluid coordination he had learned to fear. All ships, bioscan your crew immediately. Hart commanded. Anyone showing signs of infection is to be isolated immediately. But the warning came too late. The planet's surface began to move, revealing itself not as a world but as a vast organism. What Hart had taken for mountains and continents were actually massive creatures, living ships the size of cities that lifted off with impossible grace. They moved not as individual vessels but as organs of a single body, each one perfectly coordinated with the others. Evasive maneuvers. Hart ordered, but he knew it was futile. How do you evade an enemy that can predict your every move because it has been inside your head? The Phoenix shuddered as energy beams punched through their shields. Around them, ships exploded in flowers of destruction, each death illuminating the magnitude of their failure. The human frigate Liberty managed to ram one of the organic ships, its captain's final transmission a defiant scream that cut through the chaos. "Commander, massive energy buildups across the planet's surface," his tactical officer called out. "They're charging some kind of superweapon." Hart watched as the Dominion battlecruiser Defiance made a desperate attack run, diving through the planet's atmosphere toward the neural core. For a heartbeat, he thought they might actually reach their target. Then the ship simply stopped, suspended in mid-air by invisible forces. Through his telescopic sensors, Hart could see the crew through the viewports, their bodies convulsing in perfect synchronization as they were converted in real time. "They're being assimilated," Elena whispered, her voice breaking. "The whole ship." Hart made the hardest decision of his life. "All weapons, target the Defiance." "Sir, there are no longer any crew aboard that vessel," Hart said, his voice like ice. "Fire." The missile struck the converted battlecruiser just as it began to turn toward the remaining fleet. The explosion was magnificent and terrible, a funeral pyre for 800 souls who had died twice, once as individuals, then as unwilling servants of something that should not exist. But their sacrifice created the opening they needed. The Phoenix, her hull breached in a dozen places and bleeding atmosphere, managed to slip through the planet's defenses. Hart watched the neural core grow larger on their screen, a pulsing mass of organic circuitry that hurt to look at directly. "One shot," he told his weapons officer. "Everything we have." The Phoenix's main gun, designed to crack asteroids, fired point-blank into the heart of the Hive's consciousness. The explosion that followed was not just physical but psychic, a scream of rage and pain that echoed across the galaxy as the collective intelligence experienced individual death for the first time in eons. The planet convulsed. The organic ships faltered in their perfect coordination. Across the battlefield, Hive creatures stopped mid-attack, their movements suddenly random and confused. But victory came at a cost that would echo through nightmares. As the last of both fleets fell silent around them, Hart realized they were alone among the wreckage of their hopes. They had won, but the price had been almost everything they had fought to protect. "Casualty reports," he said quietly. 94% losses, Sarah reported, her voice hollow. 30 ships and 18,000 crew members. Hart nodded, feeling each death as a personal failure. They had saved the galaxy, but the galaxy they had saved was forever changed. The Phoenix drifted alone among the debris of two civilizations, her hull scarred but intact. Through the observation deck windows, Hart watched the dying planet below as its biomechanical structures collapsed like a punctured lung. The Hive's coordination network was severed, its countless drones reverting to base survival instincts. His crew worked quietly around him, processing the aftermath of their Pyrrhic victory. Sarah coordinated with the few surviving ships scattered across the system. Jake ran diagnostics on their damaged systems. Elena analyzed the bio-readings from the dying world below. They had won, but winning had never felt so much like losing. "Status report," Hart said finally. "The Hive network is definitely severed," Elena reported, her voice carrying exhaustion that went bone deep. "Without central coordination, the remaining creatures are scattering to the outer rim. They'll likely remain dormant for decades, maybe centuries. Or until they evolve a new coordination method," Hart added grimly. "Possibly. But Commander." Elena turned to face him, her expression mixing hope with trepidation. The infected crew members, the ones who survived, they're recovering. Whatever hold the Hive had on them is broken. They're remembering who they were. Hart felt something loosen in his chest. At least some good had come from their sacrifice. And the Dominion? Effectively finished as a galactic power, Sarah added quietly. Admiral Thane's ship is the only major vessel still operational, and she's requested permission to accompany us back to human space. She says her people need time to process what's happened. Hart nodded. The galaxy they had known was ending, but perhaps something better could grow from its ashes. Jake, plot a course for home. It's time to, Commander, urgent transmission from Deep Space Monitoring Station Alpha 7, Sarah interrupted, her voice suddenly tense. They're detecting massive energy signatures at the galactic rim. Something new. Hart's blood went cold. The Hive? No, sir. This is different. Structured. Technological. And according to their readings. Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. It's been out there the whole time. Watching us. The main display activated, showing a cascade of sensor data that defied easy interpretation. But within the chaos, Hart could see patterns, mathematical sequences, energy distributions, quantum signatures that spoke of intelligence vast and ancient and utterly alien. Elena, analysis. Dr. Rodriguez studied the readings with growing alarm. Commander, whatever this is, it's not just more advanced than the Hive. It's more advanced than anything in our databases. The energy output alone suggests technology that could manipulate matter at the subatomic level. And if I'm reading these patterns correctly, she continued, her voice growing smaller, it's been observing our battle. Studying us. Learning from how we fought the Hive. Hart felt the familiar weight of command settle back onto his shoulders, heavier than ever before. They had saved the galaxy from one nightmare, only to discover that something far worse had been waiting in the shadows. How long until it reaches inhabited space, he asked. Sarah worked frantically at her console. At current velocity, 18 months. Maybe less if it can accelerate beyond our detection thresholds. Hart stared out at the stars that had once seemed so beautiful, so full of promise. Now they felt like the eyes of predators, watching from the darkness between worlds. All hands, this is the commander, he announced over the ship's communication system. We're going home. We have 18 months to prepare for something that makes the Hive look like a minor inconvenience. I suggest we make them count. As the Phoenix turned toward home, Hart couldn't shake the feeling that their greatest test still lay ahead. The Hive had been a mindless force of nature, terrible but ultimately comprehensible. What approached now was something different, something that had watched civilizations rise and fall with the patience of geological time. The war for survival was far from over. If anything, it was just beginning. In the depths of space, ancient mechanisms that predated human civilization began to stir. Mathematical constructs of impossible complexity calculated probabilities and outcomes across millions of variables. And somewhere in that vast mechanical mind, a decision was reached. The experiment had provided sufficient data. Now it was time for the final phase. The stars themselves seemed to dim as something vast and patient began its inexorable journey toward a galaxy that had no idea how much darker the universe was about to become. Epilogue 3 months later, on a rebuilt human colony at the edge of known space, children played games inspired by stories of the Phoenix and her crew. They acted out battles against imaginary monsters, always winning, always saving the day. They had no way of knowing that in the deep observatories scattered across human space, scientists tracked the approach of something that defied classification. Something that moved between stars like a god walking among mortals, reshaping reality with each step. Commander Hart stood on the observation deck of humanity's newest battleship, watching those same children play in the colony's central plaza below. In 18 months, perhaps less, those children would face something that would make their games seem prophetic. The question was no longer whether humanity would survive. The question was whether survival would be worth the price they would have to pay. In the darkness between galaxies, something smiled with a billion mechanical faces, and the universe held its breath.